It is factors such as these and the historical murders of Antap priest that had started after the 1824 revolt, which is detailed in the documentary Anapane, that drove the Antap into the hills from the beaches where the people were. Later, the colonizers' retaliation from the unconscious event of 1876 drove them deep into secrecy. The secrecy caused the Kwayan to have near permanent control behind the impenetrable veil that can be developed with that type of unconscious motivational use of fear that might be initiated protectively at childhood. The investigating colonizers must have realized that a general motive to create insanity was found through an instinct with a depth not well understood, love, and that it was used in the victim's unconscious mind to create a basis of knowledge that compelled them with their own instincts of their deep unconscious to go insane. When the elder Antap men had the mass insanity designed, it was easy to compel the young men to travel around the Santa Barbara community and speak to the colonizers with accurate complexity from one of the deepest existing natural understandings of love as a human instinct serving life. The investigators from the federal government at this point, acting in the county, noted it was often learned that a year or so before the victim was hypnotically made insane, and sometimes the victims knew very well what had happened, that a young Indian man had made their acquaintance through employment or some other means, that the young man spoke at length about the meanings of love to human life. A new fear, now focused in the pagan uses of an understanding of love, which was naturally accurate and valid, had developed. The fear pushed the colonizers back into an old policy of persecution. Confronted with this understanding of which instincts were invoked by the ancient hypnotists, those investigating the mass insanity began a campaign of killing any Indian man that spoke of love to a white person. The Antap were horrified at this while trapped in an unconscious state. They could not reason in order to comprehensively deal with the problem for some few generations, perhaps. However, the Antap had tried to stop the young men from speaking about love, but the instructions of the medicine woman were too compelling, and they would not cease to share their understanding of the sacred emotion. In escalation, a desperate effort to stop the young men was developed by the wounded, unconscious group of Antap. A ceremony of punishment with a harrowing reminder of death was then created by unconscious default and inflicted on the young men by the Antap to stop them. They shot them with an arrow, grazing the side of the torso, inflicting a flesh wound, a grisly reminder of death. What might happen if they spoke of love in the colonizers' world? The practice has stopped, but scars have been seen in modern times on older men. Another instance of colonization forbidding indigenous people from speaking of love can be found in a recent documentary titled Kevin, Annette, and Canada's Genocide, available on Google Video.
It was always hard for us to tell one another we love you, because we were taught to love was wrong. They told us to love was wrong, that was the devil's work. But yet these priests and nuns could hug and kiss, and we couldn't even hug our own brothers. We couldn't even hold them and tell them we loved them.
While this was happening, the courts created another type of secrecy as they began sorting the medical examinations in court cases of insanity, removing any that mentioned Indians. Those separated files were going to be hidden in judges' chambers and not kept in the public record, a violation of state laws. The awareness of the psychological event that was happening, which the Kwayan of the Antap worked to create, was being deemed unacceptable and covered up instead of confronted, then understood in the colonizers' court as the Antap had hoped. The Independent newspaper of 1876 placed all of the news regarding the mass insanity in a few issues discreetly. Due to the fear created during the Crusades, the people accepted this omission, even though they knew that the function of the Median courts was being subverted. After 10 years or so, those few issues of the Independent newspaper covering the insanity were removed from the archives. The shameful event where Indians had influenced the minds of colonizers was effectively eliminated from history, but the streets of the city will never be right. event where approximately 3/4 of the colonizing population of Santa Barbara was made insane was effectively hidden from history. For 80 years, the separated case files and medical examinations were kept hidden in judges' chambers until 1959, when the counties of California were reformed. At that point, all of the old court case paper files were to be transferred to another medium for preservation for perpetuity before destruction, according to state laws of record-keeping, which protected the long-term interests of the people. Very logical and wise laws, because the events recorded in courts are basically mistakes of some kind. A people who forget their mistakes are likely to repeat them. The great fear of that vague and forbidden knowledge of the unconscious mind had dominated once again. The laws of the state serving the people's greater interest were violated in the insanity actions. The hidden court case files and their medical examinations of the old district court were brought to the courthouse tower, where various records were being legally destroyed as a part of the reformation of counties. They were placed in the pile of records to be burned as if they had been microfilmed, something required by law when they had not been. The last and largest physical evidence of a people's efforts to increase humanity's awareness of its unconscious potential was destroyed with the insanity actions of the District Court of Santa Barbara, California, in an unreasonable evasion of our inherent responsibility to recognize the truth of ourselves, our psychological and spiritual existence, endangering our futures, with a curse of ignorance causing repetitions of mistakes. Doing the same thing over and over while expecting different results has been termed a form of insanity. Reasonably, in modern times, with knowledge of a hidden history, a lawsuit was filed in 1997 to try and find real tools to apply to the colonized cycle of imposed ignorance, enabling the destructive behaviors of society by convincing psychology and psychiatry that ancient people, more than 120 years earlier in 1876 in Santa Barbara, had actually known of an effective method by which relatively severe mental illness might be cured. From that lawsuit, a subpoena ducis tecum was properly filed and served upon the custodian of records at the Santa Barbara County Jail in 1998 to use the arrest and booking records from 1878 as evidence of the missing insanity actions and substantiate allegations of motive. Since the Magna Carta, it has been required to have an insanity action for every arrest for a crime of insanity. The witness of the county failed to appear in court on that subpoena. This, as will be shown, deprived the public of information critical to gaining the support of modern medicine and the development of methods for action in directly treating the unconscious mind, something logically needed to begin the task of creating functional cures for mental illness, true hope for treating the most prominent and disruptive destructive disorders our society suffers from. In continued efforts to see an appropriate treatment for public mental illness, this producer researched potentials of psychological history from the 1830s to the present to develop a logical proposal for treatment direct to the unconscious mind. Then was granted an appointment with mental health care officials in 1999, including the director of the county mental health department. The director and chief medical doctor of the Santa Barbara County Mental Health Department, upon request, produced a letter dated September 24, 1999, which represents a de facto approval of a treatment using narcohypnosis to hopefully mimic the trance state of somnambulism and interact directly with human instincts. No response in writing, as the letter offered, was ever received from the Mental Health Department. Logically, the director and doctor had shown a desire to make the mental health department generally be accountable by the provision of the letter as compelled by the humanitarian Socratic oath, as well as job description, common decency, then State Health and Safety Code 1370.4, requiring that municipalities benefiting from state health plans work with the public to develop investigative and experimental treatments. It is most likely that they were prohibited by superiors from providing the written response promised in their